Welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. We're off to a little bit of a start here with the music playing second time, but we're going to make up for it because we have the incomparable Tej Seth here today. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs of Sumer Sports. I'm joined by one of our data scientists, one of the best data scientists when it comes to football in the world. Tej, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I don't have the fresh haircut that you do on the show. So, hopefully the podcast listeners have a better view of me than the people watching on the stream right now. But, I'm still going to try to compete and stay up to the takes that you're giving out, even despite that today.
Well, look, you had a week last week. I feel like, we've all come of age at different times, but the NFL, calendar is just such a unique beast. And I think it's so much fun when you sort of like look at the timeline of, you have the season, then you have the playoffs, and you have the Super Bowl, you have the combine. And you did such a good job for us at Sumer Sports. If anybody wants to go to sumersports.com and look at by the way, one of our best friends here, Dave Safaro. The roar is being restored. And you did such a good job talking about which combine events matter the most and which ones don't. And then we get to the free agency. And I thought that you had such a great tweet and article over the past week talking about, sort of what positions in free agency are basically, more prized and more valued. And you basically predicted it this week, where all these guards, the Robert Hunts, the Damian Lewises of the world, were getting signed. Tej, when you come up for air after week one of the free agency period, what were your thoughts?
I do think it was with the interior offensive lineman and how much movement there was from that position. I mean, you look at even like the Titans going out and signing Lloyd Cushenberry, which like our friend Brad Spielberger released the details of that contract. And like, that was a big price to pay for that. You think about the Panthers going out and really fortifying their interior offensive line. The Rams doing basically the same thing, re-signing Kevin Dotson, signing Jonah Jackson from the Lions to go there and shuffling some of their interior offensive line as well. And, the article and research that I was looking at said that when you look at the top 15 players in terms of average per year, dollars wise at each position, offensive guards is the position that moves the most in free agency. The opposite of that is wide receivers, where before Calvin Ridley, there wasn't a single wide receiver in the top 15 that wasn't traded or drafted and extended by the team that they were on. But offensive guards had more than 50% of players move between teams when they got one of the top contracts of their position.
Yeah, let's just even take a look at that. If you look at Over the Cap, like our probably favorite resource for this, the great Jason Fitzgerald, but plenty of other people, Brad Spielberger, who is our colleague at PFF. If you look at this, it absolutely paints the picture. Now, this is just left guard here, but you look at Jonah Jackson, for example, who's a Ram. He was previously of Detroit. Joe Thuney of the Chiefs. He was previously of the Patriots. Damian Lewis of the Panthers. He just signed via free agency. Same with John Runyon. Ezra Cleveland was traded over from Minnesota. Now that one doesn't count as a free agency signing, but again, you have a bunch of players. Connor McGovern was available via free agency last year from Dallas, or I believe he might have been traded, but he was able to move teams. If you also look at, for example, right guard as well in some of these top players. Now, Lindstrom, that's our boss, Thomas Dimitrov. He drafted him. Robert Hunt is a player, again, the second highest right guard in terms of APY was signed in free agency. Wyatt Teller, similarly. Shaq Mason was also a player who, again, was drafted by somebody else. Brandon Sheriff was a free agent that was signed by the Jacksonville Jaguars. And just to give you an idea, let's not even look at wide receiver, that the points you made. Let's just look at left tackle, another position that's relatively premium. Tunsil was a trade. Andrew Thomas was a draft pick. Trent Williams was a trade. Deion Dawkins was a draft pick. Jake Matthews, again, by Thomas Dimitrov, a draft pick. Colton Miller, a draft pick. Cam Robinson, a draft pick. Garrett Bowles, a draft pick. It gets all the way down to Orlando Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals as far as players who were actually accessible via free agency to get to that point. So It is like this NFL, and I know people don't want to talk about it. We're going to get to Justin Fields in a sec because it actually speaks to some of the reasons that we get some of the dynamics that we get, but positional value really actually matters in the NFL. And if you're not truly understanding these things and moving with the flow of how it works, you can be caught off guard with what happens in the league, Tej.
Right. That's a great point. And like, I think there are two ways to look at the positional value side of things. There's the way that the league views it as a whole, where you take into account, just like the average per year of each position. You can do look at the top 10 each position. You can kind of see how the league values the top players at their position. You can look at where they spend their draft capital, how often they actually let their players reach free agency at each position. Like that's kind of the league, the market going rate. And then there's also like our way of looking at positional value, which you built, have built multiple different types of wins above replacement or WAR metrics. That is like an advanced way of looking at even going beyond the market. Can we predict what the league will eventually see positional value as long as they kind of stay through with some of the trends that they are looking at right now? And like, I think even just using the first one can give you such a good understanding of kind of the moves you want to make, like which free agents you want to sign. I think like, we used the Bears as an example last week when talking about this, where like the Bears went out and signed 2 off-ball linebackers in free agency last year. And like that's a position that reaches free agency. Like you can make an argument they overspent, but like it's clear they have a plan of spending resources on premium positions in the draft and then signing non-premium positions in free agency. And I think other teams that do that will have plus CV opportunities over time.
Yeah, and here's a good question, and I think I'm not going to pick on Dylan too much here. I just want to be illustrative of the NFL. He said, didn't interior offensive line units of Kansas City and Baltimore somewhat prove that they can be essential in the pass game? Yeah, but I remember, Tej, like when the Chiefs made their first 2 Super Bowls of the Mahomes era, I remember tweeting out explicitly the lack of investment that both of those teams made. The first Chiefs Super Bowl in 2019, their interior offensive line was like, it was like Andrew Wiley, who was a nothing draft pick. Laurent Duvernay-Tardif was a 6th round pick that they, yes, did re-up in a contract. And then Austin Ryder, who is basically like a veteran minimum-ish player. The San Francisco 49ers, I think, were similarly yoked there, where Laken Tomlinson was a bust for the Lions, and he goes and plays a decent role there. By the way, he goes to the Jets and doesn't play quite as well. Sort of shows sort of the transiency or the dependency of some of these players on the scheme that they're playing in, which again shows their value. It is a very cyclical league, and I think it can sometimes be folly to look at a team, for example, like the Ravens with the 2 linebackers that they have, or the Niners with the 2 linebackers they have, and say automatically, okay, that makes these two positions premium now, and you got to go out and get them, because I think by the very nature of the league, you are going to have periods of time when various positions that are not premium positions are up or down. But in the history of the league, quarterback, left tackle, wide receiver, defensive end, interior defensive line has kind of come on the scene very late. Corner, those positions have always been important. And then over the course of the last half a dozen years, the other positions, whether they be linebacker, nickel corner, safety, guard, center, tight end, they all take turns at being kind of these ancillary positions that we point to a la Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie and say, okay, that position matters this year. And I think that almost proves the point of how sort of random that those positions can be from a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fair point from Dylan to bring that up, but like you mentioned, like it's often the positions where the majority of their kind of like tasks and stuff that they have to do on offense is affecting the pass game. And so like obviously quarterback, but when you look at the wide receiver, cornerback matchups, the edge rusher versus offensive tackle matchups, like those are really the positions that you often can't get in free agency. If you want like a top of the market player, you really have to look into the draft for those positions. And then we usually see that first round draft picks at those positions, especially like have a steeper draft curve compared to other positions. You look at, tight end, linebacker, offensive guard, like those are tougher positions to project from college to pro than some of the other premium positions that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it just is. It's a league where you just have these random blips, and I think it's what makes it awesome. It's the casinoification of the NFL, and I mean that in the best way. Like the casinos are fun, not because it's negative EV, but it's fun because you can win, and you can win for an extended period of time, even amongst the fact that they're negative EV. So if you love football, you like to see the fact that a team can win, building their team around the Fred Warners and the Dre Greenlaws, and you can love the fact that Quentin Nelson's an amazing player, even though at 6th overall it might not have been the best draft pick, and so on and so forth. I think that the one kind of negative EV thing this entire time has been talking about Justin Fields, though, Tej, right? I think it's negative EV because we all knew that he wasn't going to be the Bears quarterback this year. I think it's also negative EV because a lot of us have friends who are Bears fans. I mean, you're from the Detroit area. I'm from the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, so we're not all that far from Chicago. And there was never a quarterback in the history of this franchise, and they've had a lot, and none of them have really ever been all that good. They've had a lot. There's never been a quarterback that I've seen a fan base go so insane over. And now that it's gone, and he's gone for, I would say, frankly, Tej, a price that I did not even imagine would be that low, a 6th-round pick that became conditional on a 4. When you think of this book closing on the Justin Fields era in Chicago, how many lessons can we learn from this? That's all we can do here is take lessons from this. What lessons can we learn from this?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on a point briefly that you brought up, like we do know a lot of Bears fans. I think that, it's a great fan base, obviously. I think we both got pretty frustrated with how much they wanted to defend Justin Fields and keep Justin Fields, especially when you look at our website. Justin Fields ranked 23rd in EPA per play last season. Sam Howell ranked 28th in EPA per play. Not too much of an ordinal difference there. I didn't see a single Commanders fan argue they should keep Sam Howell instead of drafting a quarterback and trade that pick. But the Bears fan base was pretty split, kind of depending on, what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to take Marvin Harrison with that pick or trade it. So, I'm kind of glad that is past us now. But from a pure lessons perspective, I think that, the main and obvious one is you have to be pretty careful about drafting a quarterback in a situation where a coach is coaching for their job in that year. And I think, Matt Nagy was basically given an ultimatum, when he went into Fields' rookie year about like winning enough games to keep his job. And I think that put Fields into a pretty unfair situation where they got a little bit desperate. They put him in his first game against the Browns, which was a very bad matchup for the Bears offensive line. And Fields got sacked, I think like 8 or 9 times in that game because of the Browns defensive line. That really just kind of, you saw his development get stunted, along the way, where he was never really able to develop a lot of the sack avoidance skills that we've preached so much about. And I think that really affected him, not only college to pro, some of that not good sack avoidance stayed with him, but also he wasn't able to really shake that out of him once he was in the pros, just because he was thrown into a desperate situation.
Yeah, and I feel a decent amount of guilt here, not necessarily. So we did the text analytics work at PFF. A lot of the words that, for example, scouting reports through the industry, guys like Dane Brugler, who are very connected, a lot of the things that were said about Fields were said about other quarterbacks who busted, right? And he was very much the guy who was different as far as the reports. But you watch, and we all remember the games we bet on. I had a humongous bet on Ohio State +7 against Clemson in the divisional or the semifinal round of the 2020 college football playoff. Fields played a phenomenal game with broken ribs. They came back from being behind, and he was awesome. And he outplayed Trevor Lawrence, the guy who would ultimately go before him in this draft. There were plenty of draft boards. You remember the Jacksonville Jaguars draft war room. It was sort of smudged, but you could totally make it out. They had Fields ahead of, they had Fields ahead of Trey Lance. They had Fields ahead of Zach Wilson. They had Fields ahead of Mac Jones. There were plenty of people, smart people, who I think had Fields very close to Trevor Lawrence. And the one thing that we all missed, and 2019 is when I wrote the whole pressures are a quarterback stat thing, long before the Adam Harstads of the world wrote sacks were a quarterback thing. And I never really truly made the connection until far later that the stickiest metric, whether it's quarterbacks changing teams, but specifically quarterbacks from college to pro, is how well they avoid sacks when they're pressured. And you can't necessarily, and we'll show this in a second, you can't necessarily predict or control the team you go on to, but you certainly can evidently do a better job of avoiding avoiding sacks when you are pressured. That is something that can be avoided. And generally speaking, Fields had struggled with that, and it maintained itself in the pros. Patrick Mahomes, Tej, I can't remember which one is which, but his college pressure to sack ratio was 11.4 and his pro is 11.3. Like, they're terribly, incredibly close to each other. And Fields has had the similar fate. And we all looked at his accuracy and all these great things, and we just avoided the sack avoidance issue.
Right. And I think that's exactly what it is. And I mean, when you look at the pressure to sack rates from college and a lot of the quarterbacks at the bottom, like you just haven't seen a lot of those guys panned out. And, that was something that at the time that Fields was being drafted, we didn't have a lot of great info on. That I think it's something that we understand a lot better now. So, when you look at the lessons that we can take away from Fields, like, I thought his accuracy was really like high end coming out of college. But when you're taking sacks at 3 to 4% higher than the average quarterback, that's so many missed pass attempts per game. That's like, couple pass attempts that you're not able to get off per game. And the sack EPA is really taking away from a lot of what you can do on these drives. So I think when you look at all of that together, it's a lot harder. It makes an uphill battle when you come out college to pro with a high pressure to sack rate. And that is something that I think we've realized quarterbacks can control over time, because it stems from their time to throw, their time to pressure, which will feed into their pressure to sack rate or their sack rate overall.
Yeah. And then, so Fields, clearly a flawed player. I think that the issue is the Bears were clearly a flawed team, to your point. You don't have the whole, like, you certainly didn't. Like, Matt Nagy. Now, Matt Nagy, in my opinion, gets a lot of shit for a guy who took Mitch Trubisky to the playoffs twice. I know that it's an NFL with 32 teams and 14 make the playoffs. So there are going to be coaches who struggle, who still make the playoffs. But I always felt like Bears fans acted like he was horrendous, when in reality, he did some decent things there, especially in 2018 with Mitch Trubisky. But I would say, I think it's fairly easy to say that Fields in his first year or two was not dealing with league average circumstances. Yeah. And so the problem is that the Bear, and he's very likable, very affable guy. And so Bears fans cling to him. And so then you get to this point in the road, and this is where, the Benjamin Solak tweet comes out and all this kind of stuff, where it's like, well, I can't understand why people don't want Fields at this price. And it's like, of course you do. You have to, because you don't give up assets because you feel bad for Justin Fields. If you're the Bears, meaning you don't give up the opportunity cost of getting Caleb Williams or the opportunity to trade back to 2 and take Drake May or Jaden Daniels. You don't surrender that once in a decade opportunity because you felt like you did the relationship's over, right? So in that realm, that was the silliest notion. Then the next notion was this idea that Fields had so much more value than some of these other guys. And I want to sort of approach this topic with you, because the issue with Fields is two-dimensional, right? It's or two ways. It's if you spend like a second round pick on Fields and he does poorly, then that sucks. But if you spend a second rounder on him and he gives you anything less than what Jordan Love gave the Packers last year, you're also screwed, because then you're in the will they, won't they situation of giving him a second contract. And now you're the Giants with Daniel Jones. And that's worse almost than if he goes there and sucks. And so, and I understand that. And people, and I know like hipster football Twitter is like too good to talk about positional value and too good to talk about the finances of it. They just want to talk ball and how good everybody is, whatever. But like you have to understand the real realities of what the distribution looks like for Justin Fields, which is there's only one way to win, and that's if he becomes Jordan Love. And I don't think that there's a real good chance he becomes Jordan Love.
Yeah, no, I mean that's really well said. Like, I mean, it comes down to so many things, and like there's so much context missing from people like Ben Solak who are confused on why Fields went for a 6th-round pick, whereas you're going to have Jaden Daniels go either number 2 or number 3 overall in this draft. The main one is range of outcomes. When you look at Fields versus Jordan Love versus Jaden Daniels, you think about Fields right now and all the data we have on him and how hard it is to have a Josh Allen jump. It's called the Josh Allen jump because there's only one quarterback that has done it in recent history, and that was Josh Allen, right? So like that would be step one of Fields' range of outcomes is pretty narrow compared to what Jordan Love was when he started at quarterback for the Packers last year, where he went into it with a very, very wide range of outcomes because he'd only played I think it was like 2 or 3 career games in his entire NFL career after sitting for 3 years. So it's like he has the opportunity to really lean into his 90th percentile outcome, which is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, or your bottom 10 percentile outcome, which is a backup level quarterback. Like Love's range of outcomes could have been all over the place, and that's the same thing with Jaden Daniels entering the NFL, where yes, he profiles to someone like Justin Fields, but he also profiles to Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, who are similar types of quarterbacks to him. So it's like you can just look along his range of outcomes and kind of see the way that his career would play out. So that's the one thing about that. And then the other thing is the contract situation, like you brought up, where it's Justin Fields has 1 year left on his deal. They are probably not going to pick up his 5th-year option. So if he does go out and do well, and you're now uncertain about whether he's going to play more like the first couple of years of his career compared to 2024, you end up in a Daniel Jones, Baker Mayfield type situation. Or, he has the Jordan Love type season. And now you're paying him a top of the market extension, and there's still uncertainty there now that he's played away from what his prior was entering the year. Meanwhile, someone like Jaden Daniels is going to be on a rookie contract for at least 4 years. He has that 5th-year option as well. So, all of those things together, you can throw age into the mix. With Jaden Daniels being 23 and Justin Fields being 25, like I think all those things together, it makes sense why Fields went for a conditional 4th-round pick, because you're really getting Justin Fields' contract, which is that 1 year remaining. You're not getting Justin Fields on the same contract as you'd be getting Jaden Daniels.
Well, and the Hurts thing is interesting because Hurts has certainly had an up and down season. I remember tweeting out before the 2022 year, everybody's wrong about Justin Fields, everybody's wrong about Jalen Hurts. And the reason that I said that is, a lot of the fantasy football people who think that Jalen Hurts is him because he's all the rushing touchdowns and everything, like they're a little wrong because he's got limitations as a passer and all this stuff. And I think that the Eagles, as one of the sharper franchises in the whole league, understand those fully. And all the people who thought he's just a runner were wrong, because he obviously showed that he could be a passer in good circumstances with the Eagles had. And the point is in under no circumstances has Jalen Hurts ever been bad enough for them to pick in the top 10 with him as the quarterback. And so he's never opened the same doors to the Eagles that Fields opened to the Bears, even once. And so it doesn't become that. And the other part is there is value in, and we talk about this in, whether it's, with wins above replacement or whether it's fantasy football, which I know you do a great deal of modeling for us at Sumer. When you change teams and change schemes, the R squared values go down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And so the other part is, we know Fields has been very magical at times with the Bears running the football. We've seen the highs and lows. We don't know what it's going to look like in Pittsburgh. We don't know what it's going to like. We don't know what Sam Darnold's going to look like in Minnesota. He looked okay for 3. I remember talking to Peter King on the phone. He's like, Eric, what do you think about? And it's like, it was 3 games, Peter. He looked good for 3 games, and it's to me, it's like the other part is changing teams is a huge ball of uncertainty that people aren't willing to deal with. And so to earn a second contract with a team, you have to clear yourself from being able to access that rookie quarterback contract, as well as play well enough to earn that upper echelon, which is incredibly hard.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And like, I mean, if you were to look at, the quarterback's EPA per play year over year, and if they stay on the same team or they change teams, it's relatively stable year to year. You think that the same quarterbacks are usually on top, and they kind of stay that way. And then, some of the bottom quarterbacks get another chance to improve, and oftentimes they are able to. But when they change teams, and, because of the selection bias of the quarterbacks that are available, that are changing teams, and also just like the situational aspects, like, it's very flat. It's very hard to predict what a quarterback will look like year to year when they are moving situations, just because their production becomes such a high variance thing to predict. And I think, like, yeah, when you look at Fields, or you look at even some of these other veteran quarterbacks that have changed teams, like, the Russell Wilson types, where it's like, you really don't know what it's going to look like in their new situation. You're hoping that it's going to be a lot more of their right tail than their left tail from their previous spot. But sometimes there's that information advantage of the original team understanding what the limitations were of the quarterback, and not making sure those popped up often, but also leaning into their strengths. And the new team, it either takes them longer to figure that out, or they're just not able to figure that out. And that's where the range of outcomes and the variance comes in. I see, like, Alex in the chat says, like, a Jimmy Garoppolo moment, which is very true with what we're talking about.
Yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo changes teams. It's not anymore close to what we're used to with him. And there's an element of, and I think you're so much better at this than me. I think, like, you have such a likable disposition to you that I've been in the past in my career accused, and I think fairly so, of kind of saying that teams are kind of clueless in some spots. This is a place where teams have a huge clue, and I want to transition a little bit to an article that I wrote this weekend on whether or not you should sit quarterbacks early in your career, because I think that there's a graph here that, in my opinion, is sort of the money graph. And let me get to our homepage here at Sumer. By the way, the vast majority of this, I'm going to puff Tej up, is the work of Tej here. How draft capital spend is changing and what it means for the 2024 NFL draft. That's a team effort by many. What types of players actually hit free agency? That was all Tej. The one that I'm going to talk about here is, should rookie quarterbacks sit in year one? I'm going to go ahead and click here. This is by me. I wrote this yesterday, but I want to show everybody one little graph. For one, notice here, these are just first round quarterbacks since the new CBA. Draft position does correlate with how well they perform. This is the log of the approximate value of the player earned in the first 3 years that they are a starter. Notice here, though, if you do trade up for a player, that does abate, which makes sense, Tej, right? If you trade up, now draft order is a little bit uncorrelated with how good the teams are. Mm-hmm. So that makes some sense. Now, the interesting one, though, I think the money graph here is this one, which is, I think, an actual indication of, like, these teams kind of have a clue. The red line is basically going through the points where players that literally started the first game. And the x-axis, the preseason market win total, is basically how good the team was. And my thesis was, the teams that are sitting can afford to sit the player because they're good. And so guys that are sitting, it's not necessarily teams choosing to sit the player. It's like they can. So they do anyway, which is kind of the case. Notice here that, like, the only red dot there of a good team playing a player right away was when the Patriots played Mac Jones right away. He had to beat out Cam Newton to do that. For the most part, the players that play right away are actually on bad teams. And the funny part is as the team gets better, the player that plays early gets worse. And to me, that's just simply the draft curve. As the pick position gets higher, the player gets worse, right? And that just means that I think NFL teams are pretty damn good at being like, this guy's ready to play. And they throw him out in the Wolves, and if he's a good, like, so those two dots up there are Cam Newton and Kyler Murray, right? Cam Newton, he came onto the Panthers. They were 0.3 of a yard worse than the next worst team with Jimmy Clausen the year before. He comes in, he's amazing. He's the MVP of the league in short order. Kyler Murray, the year before he got on the Cardinals, they were 0.4 of a yard worse than the next worst team. He's on there. He has the Cardinals to the playoffs in year 3, and it does like kind of monotonically go. Now, there's only 6 players that sat all of year 1. Most of those teams are pretty damn good, and the only 2 that actually had any success were Patrick Mahomes and Jordan Love. The rest, Paxton Lynch was bad. Jake Locker was bad. Trey Lance was bad. It's not actually like there's more bads than goods in that group. But the interesting one, Tej, is this yellow line. It's teams that try to play or try to sit their quarterback early, right? Those teams are slightly better. The average season win total for those teams is about half a win more, 6.5 wins, preseason market win total, than teams that play the guy right away, which is 6 wins. So they try to be good. And the funny part is the success of those quarterbacks is actually moderately correlated with how good that team is. Meaning, right, those teams know they should be sitting their starter, and then when he gets in there, how good he does depends upon how good. So, and I wrote about this in the article. It's Lamar Jackson comes in because Joe Flacco gets hurt versus Blake Bortles plays because the Jags are so bad that it doesn't make sense to play Chad Henne anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this graph is like fascinating to look at. I loved looking at it in the article, and I mean that convergence between the yellow and the red lines is so interesting. Where it's like when you look at the players, the quarterbacks that started right away, week 1, like that is the draft curve where you're seeing just like the better quarterbacks, on worse teams most of the time. I think that what's going to be really interesting is the Bears are kind of an exception to this as a team that won 7 games last year, but is picking number 1 overall because of a trade. So it's like you still see that draft curve for most teams. You think about the teams that pick in the top 5 and their preseason win totals the next year are usually pretty similar to what it was the year before. But then you think about the teams in yellow where it's that they are sitting that quarterback and then they're coming in midway through the season, because they set up a contingency plan where they can have another quarterback start the season and have their rookie kind of sit behind them, due to a wide variety of reasons. You think about Baker Mayfield coming in, you think about Lamar Jackson coming in, like these teams had something set up where they didn't have to start that quarterback year 1 because their roster might have been good enough to be an outside shot for the playoffs, or they still had a veteran quarterback there that was good enough to start and they could figure out the rest of their roster. But I think that it goes back to the really interesting point. Yeah, and the comment mentions the Patrick Mahomes thing where you have this situation in 2017 where the Chiefs start out 5-1, they end up 6-6 at one point. Like, do the Chiefs look back at not starting Patrick Mahomes midway through that season and like they think, if they could do things differently, would they have put him in halfway through that season because they realized the team was good enough as a supporting cast to compete for the playoffs, but maybe the quarterback they had wasn't good enough to win a Super Bowl?
I think about the 4 teams in the conference championship games that year, right? Blake Bortles, Case Keenum, Nick Foles, and Brady. They lost a 21-3 lead to the Tennessee Titans at home, with an opportunity they would have had to have gone, I believe, to Pittsburgh the next week. I like, as a Chiefs fan, I think about this. I think about like what happens if Dee Ford's not offsides? Do they fire Bob Sutton? And because Spags is like a huge reason why they've won 3 Super Bowls now. Like it's all butterfly effecty kind of stuff. Does Bob Sutton retire and then it's Spags? Like all these interesting things are really are really funny. And I think we just go back. Like I actually, I don't think that I think you go back in time, and I just don't think that there's a ton of evidence that sitting your quarterback is actually good. I think for the guys that do, and it's the same thing. It's like, you just graduated from college like a year ago, right? It's like you sit there during college graduation speech, and they might as well just put that airplane with all the bullet holes up there and to give the speech, the commencement speech, because it's all like, this is what worked for me. And I get it. So like, I think of course, Patrick Mahomes is going to tell you that Alex Smith helped him out, that sitting a year calmed his nerves and all this kind of stuff. And Jordan Love is going to say that Aaron Rodgers helped him out and, all this kind of stuff. I can't imagine what those conversations were like for 3 straight years, but he was, helped him out. But, and there's probably something in Andrew Luck who says, look, I would probably wake up in the morning feeling a little bit better if I didn't play my first year under Ryan Grigson and Chuck Pagano. But like, I the evidence just simply isn't there. Like, I think that NFL teams are quite good at examining when to play their quarterback or not.
Right. I mean, there's so much signal in the volume, and you can very quickly figure out like where these quarterbacks stack up. I think it becomes clear pretty early in the process where it's like you look at Trey Lance last year, and he sits his rookie year. He's slated to start his second year, and you think about all the efficient quarterbacks that Kyle Shanahan has had his entire career, like going back to Atlanta or Cleveland, but then even in San Francisco, where like Jimmy Garoppolo was a perennial top 5 player in EPA per play. Trey Lance comes in, you can say he didn't get a fair opportunity, but the 49ers quarterback efficiency did drop in the couple games he started. He gets injured. Jimmy Garoppolo comes back in, and immediately it jumps back up to the levels we're used to seeing. Brock Purdy replaces Jimmy Garoppolo and even takes it to another level that we haven't seen before. And like, you could figure out very easily that Brock Purdy was going to be a starting level quarterback for the 49ers just because of that efficiency. And then you go back and you look and you see that Trey Lance sitting might have hurt him long term, where he didn't get experience year 1. He got unlucky with his injury year 2, but you could even see like he wasn't playing at a high level. It's like, maybe if it's the causal inference of like, maybe if he did get that opportunity to start year 1 from the very first game of the season, by year 2 he would have had 17 games under his belt and would have had a much better feel of everything that happens in the NFL offense. But just because of that little starting experience and the age that he was at, like it just didn't work out for him in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think it's just so funny because we have all of these. There's just so many confounders, right? Like, you have to, and I made very clear to put this in the article, like, there's only 37 of these quarterbacks since the 2011 CBA. Draft position, talent of the quarterback, the talent of the team, all of it. There's tons of confounders, right? That could muddy the waters. There's just really no evidence. I'm not saying that you should start a quarterback right away. It's just that there's no evidence that sitting a guy works more than not. And it's quite an interesting finding, because I believe most people think the exact opposite, that if you can, you should sit a guy. And I think it comes from a long-standing world. Like, your Lions, right? Like, their number, like the biggest free agent signing in the NFL, the second biggest free agent signing ever was Reggie White, and then was Scott Mitchell. Scott Mitchell sat behind Dan Marino for 4 years. Dan Marino tore his Achilles. Scott Mitchell had like 4 good starts, and the Fords backed up the truck for Scott Mitchell. He was a huge flop. No one remembers that one, right? But everybody remembers, the Aaron Rodgers, and the Jordan Love. But it used to be that way. A lot of these quarterbacks sat because none of the quarterbacks were taken in round 1. Now quarterbacks have to be taken in round 1. They have to play right away. I think that you have to really, when you try to answer some of these questions, think about the era, think about the incentive structures that the teams used to stash quarterbacks like Tony Romo, for example, because it was so expensive to draft a quarterback first overall. There was also incentives. Now, you don't really want to stash a quarter. Well, I think you still do, but you don't want to as much as you did in the past, because Caleb Williams is super cheap. So if you end up having to take a quarterback at first overall, it's not as bad as Sam Bradford being $50 million guaranteed right away, which was the going rate for a top quarterback. Eric Berry in 2010, when he was drafted by the Chiefs, had the richest safety contract in the history of the league his first day in the NFL. Like it just was a different world. So of course you would, develop players later in rounds, and you would shy away from taking some players high because of the way the economics is. So all these confounders, and that's what makes our job as analysts and as statisticians, as data scientists, really hard. And I think that you just have to be, very explicit about the assumptions that you have, and make sure that you provide evidence, because I think folklore goes a long way.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I agree with so much of what you said there, where it's like, you look at these different quarterbacks that get drafted, in round one, and kind of like what the expectations are for them, and how quickly you can kind of find out about what their strengths are, what their flaws are, and then what their overall productivity is going to be for your team. Like, you want to learn that as quickly as possible, because that offseason in between a quarterback's rookie year and their second year in the NFL is really important for building up the type of supporting cast needed to make a quarterback kind of excel in your offense. Like, again, going back to the Browns, like, I think when you looked at Baker Mayfield's first year, like, they realized really quickly that his height might be an issue. So they go out and they do things like bring in Kevin Stefanski, who is great at drawing up these bootleg play action, like move in the pocket, getting Baker Mayfield to have a clear sight line of his receivers. You think about some of the moves that they made on their offensive line, whether it's through free agency or the draft, like they make sure that they can bolster their pass blocking so that the inside of his pocket is not crumbling. I think that the Panthers are doing something pretty similar this offseason with the offense coordinator that they brought in to be their head coach, or the offensive play caller they brought in to be their head coach, their interior offensive line, getting Deontay Johnson as a separator. Like, you can see that once you kind of figure out what your quarterback is in year one, you can do a lot of things in that offseason afterward to really make sure that they are given a better chance to succeed in year two. And in the cases where these quarterbacks sit, you don't know that much about that. Like, I think the Packers, whether it's through good drafting or a little bit of luck, like, kind of lucked into just having this supporting cast that was young and ready to develop with Jordan Love. I think it was obvious that the Chiefs had great skill position players in Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. But like, if someone like Tyreek Hill wasn't a part of the 2018 Chiefs, I think that if the Chiefs started Mahomes, like, maybe they would have gone out and been like, oh, he throws a great deep ball. We need to get a burner. We need to get someone like Tyreek Hill. So it's like, it's all these things that can kind of pile on top of each other, and they're all linked, like, through the butterfly effect, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Like, to your point, it's so funny. I wrote about this in the article too. It's like, we act like the Packers had all this information about they had perfect information about Jordan Love because they sat and watched him for 3 years, but they didn't. His fifth-year option came up last May, and they kind of like split the difference and gave him half of it. And, it was really tepid. And the other part about Jordan Love, and this is why I'm such a Jordan Love bobo, which is he watched Rodgers emerge with veterans like Devontae Adams, and MVS was ended up being a $10 million wide receiver, and Bakhtiari. And then he ended up having to play with totally different circumstances than he learned under, and he did well. You don't know. And to that point, the Chiefs, when it was time for Patrick to start, they signed Sammy Watkins to a $16 million. They overpaid for Watkins to bring him in, and just to make sure, right? And so I agree with you. It's just such an interesting one, and you find out the most. And the last point I'll make before by the way, let's not forget two-time Super Bowl champion Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Let's also not forget this. NFL teams, and we know plenty of our friends work for NFL teams. During the season, it's incredibly hard to take time out of the preparation, to take time out of the game planning, to take time out of the developing of the players on the field to develop your quarterback who you're going to play in a year. I think we overestimate how much like that. It's it's incumbent. It's in a weird way. It's probably apt that a guy is obsessed. Who's responsible for Patrick Mahomes developing the year that Patrick Mahomes sat on the bench? It was Patrick Mahomes, not Andy Reid, not Matt Nagy, not Alex Smith. It was Patrick Mahomes, and I guarantee you that guy wanted to play. And it's just because these NFL teams have so much to deal with on a week-to-week basis, it's probably best that he's on the field. So And I know that it's not perfect, and I know it's a case by case basis. But good job, NFL. You're doing a good job of deciding who should be on the field, which is most of these quarterbacks that you draft high. Figure it out, just like going for 2 when you're down 9. Figure out the information early, and even if it's bad, bad information is better sometimes than no information. This has been an awesome podcast. I scheduled it only so I got to hang out with Tej for an hour. And hopefully it was as fun for you guys as it was for me. Tej, plug you and Sean's podcast for a little bit before we head out.
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for bringing me. Always big shoes to fill stepping in for Thomas, but appreciate you letting me riff with you here for these 45 minutes. And yeah, I mean, if you want to listen to more of this stuff, Sean and I do Stats and Scheme every Tuesday, and then I also usually join Sam Brookhouse's and Ben Brown's podcast, The Class Play, on Wednesdays.
Awesome, yeah, and if you guys are interested at all in the if you guys missed Thomas, Friday night on SiriusXM, Channel 88. This week, it'll be a little bit later because we have the NCAA tournament. We're going to get bumped, I think, to closer to midnight. But most weeks, it'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern. As far as this show, for Tej Seth, for Eric Eager, for producer Matt Stopsky, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.